For me, it's always been sort of a natural thing to sort of have a respect for the history, of architecture. I don't know that you can really be a good designer of new buildings if you don't understand old buildings and appreciate them. So for me, wanting to do a historic building as my own office and my living unit was sort of a natural, because I grew up in a sort of historic house, and I went to parochial and even high school in a sort of historic buildings, and so I was surrounded growing up by sort of historic buildings. I went to college and was educated in a historic building, and it just seemed like a natural. I just sort of, I don't know that you call it a passion, but you just have a sense of this is the right thing to do, kind of thing. For me, historic buildings, or even just old buildings in general, they just have a lot of character that you really can't build into new construction. We can do lots of great things with technology these days, but you really, to even build a brick wall that looks like the one behind me, you really can't get this kind of character in modern methods. Why wouldn't you take an old building? It's way cheaper to have it built in like that than it is to buy it brand new and then try to distress it somehow. So when I started my search, of course, we were overcrowded staff-wise with my office where we were previously, and so I started looking for a building available in downtown Casper, and of course a lot of my favorite buildings over the years have gotten demolished because there isn't incentives in Wyoming, financial incentives, or a lot of them anyway, to do historic renovations. So there's some federal tax credit incentives that are relatively easy to get, but the state doesn't provide any incentives. So that's why you see a lot of buildings that are deteriorating. A lot of people find it's easier to just demo them out instead of fixing them up. But I obviously have a different view of that. So I started looking for a building, and I knew this one was available here, and the price was kind of high, and it had sat empty for a long time, and there's a whole story about that. In fact, my realtor is the same realtor that sold it to the guy that owned it previously, and his house burned in Florida the same day he closed on this building, and he's sitting in a prison somewhere paying for that crime. But so it went back to the bank that financed it almost immediately, and then it sat empty for about 8 years, and then I picked it up about 2.5 years ago because that bank finally decided to lower the price to something a little bit more reasonable, because it was up there in the above over $1 million mark, and it just needed a lot of work. There was a lot of pigeons in here. The building had no insulation. The roofing was bad. All of the windows needed to be replaced. They were single pane. There was no energy efficiency in the whole building. The HVAC and the electrical was just a hodgepodge, so much so that I was even afraid to turn the utilities on when I bought the building. I actually hired a contractor to come in and just gut the thing out down to structure, just so I knew I had at least a safe building that I could, I could start the cleanup process on this building, because the previous owner had done a bunch of painting of the brick. In fact, up to 7 and 8 layers on the exterior in some places, and the locals all know that it was pretty colorful. I mean, there were pinks and greens and baby blue and red and just all kinds of colors on the outside, and there were tattered canopies that needed to come down, and there were elements that weren't necessarily historic on the outside that we wanted to come down as well. And then in the inside, we wanted, this kind of warehouse look, which we've done. And so we started, and there was a lot of work to that too, because there was paint and plaster both on the inside walls. And so, like, for instance, the wall behind me is a beautiful brick right now, but when we bought it, that had about a 3/4 inch layer of plaster that had to be chiseled off and then grinded down and then pressure washed to get it cleaned up to this level. So a lot of the interior had that on it too. And then we made use of the old building elements, like the thermal mass of the walls. So we ran some energy calculations as to, you know, what it would take to insulate the walls, and then we had our engineer tell us what the payback would be over just leaving them and taking advantage of the thermal mass of the sun heating up the brick during the day, and then that filters into the building throughout the night. So we actually opted for that route because we knew after our engineer did the calculations that the payback was long-term. It wasn't a short-term payback, and so it didn't make sense to take advantage of that. So some of the other features of the building, of this particular building, that we knew was readily available when we bought it were things like the terrazzo floor, which we didn't even protect during construction because it's polished marble, and so it can take a lot of abuse. But a lot of things we didn't know about the building because they were hidden. So we have beautiful hardwood floors on the upper levels of the building that we didn't know were there because there was purple and pink carpet in the building, but actually that carpet was protecting the hardwood underneath. And so once we sanded down the glue and the layers of aging from the wood, and we're still currently working on that in my loft area, we have these beautiful hardwood floors now, and they have that distressed look that I talked about earlier. So again, people are paying high dollar for that look, and we just have it built right into the building. So other things that inspired us about the building were the old steel frame windows that were prevalent on the north side of the building. And so we came back with a modern, energy efficient window that emulates the old steel frame look. And that's what most people notice on the outside of our building when they drive by, and we get lots of compliments on the look of the building. Also, we wanted to keep the warehouse look. For those in Casper who don't know, this east-west strip along Collins, and Collins used to be called Railroad Street, and the reason it was called Railroad Street is this was an old Chicago Northwestern rail yard, and this building, the original part of the building, was one of Chicago Northwestern's buildings, and they constructed it. And so the room that we're actually sitting in right now was a 30s addition to that building, and it was built by Casper Supply, I believe, and we're still not sure on what they were. So anyway, we knew it was a warehouse style building, and so we wanted to keep that theme moving forward. So we've exposed conduit and ductwork and even inspired the types of light fixtures that we use in the building, which are for the most part warehouse style. And inspired the catwalk grating that we have used on the guardrails in parts of the building. And we also have steel stairs and rebar for our handrail, and all of those little items, all those little details were actually inspired by the original use of the building, which was warehouse. And even right down to our picture display, these cables and the mounting style were actually inspired by that whole warehouse theme. Also, another thing that we did was semi-environmental. Is for those in Casper who know, when we did the window replacement, we went for about a year where all the windows were plywooded up while we waited for the new windows to arrive, and we saved that plywood, flipped it around to the non-weathered side, and we reused that same plywood on the inside for walls. And again, it complements the whole warehouse theme that we have going on. So we just put a polyurethane sealer over the plywood, and then it's good to go. windows, we don't have any view on the north side here, so we wanted chicken wire glass. They don't make chicken wire glass anymore. That would have been appropriate for this historic building, but we found this hammered glass that kind of does the same thing. It lets in the diffused light, but it blocks the view, which we don't have a view, so gives us the natural light and gives us that look of chicken wire glass, even though it's not. Then on to Hotel Virginia. Most of the locals know that building as the old county annex building that the county occupied for a number of years, I think probably more than a decade or so, on the corner of First and David. And we know it now as the Hotel Virginia because that's what it originally was. And so we're renovating that, and I'm not an owner in that, but I am the architect on the project. And again, I have a passion for these types of buildings, and so when I saw that building go empty, I shudder when I think that people wanted to tear that one down too, just like some people wanted to tear this building down. And once you erase history like that, you really can never get it back. And like I've mentioned already, you just can't build that kind of character into new buildings. And so people want that look, and I think they desire the look, they just don't know how to achieve it. And so, and that's a lot of the problem in Casper, is we don't have contractors and subcontractors that are used to doing that type of project, and so it seems a little foreign to them until they get used to doing it. So when the county annex building came up for sale, I initially contacted this group of developers in Rapid City, South Dakota that I've done several of these same types of projects with over the years. I think I've done 5 or 6 similar building renovations, old buildings, because that's kind of what this developer specializes in over in that area of the country. And I'd already been working with them, trying to get them interested in Casper, which is not very far away from them, to sort of set the example by doing a building or two and showing people that, hey, you can do this, and it's cheap and it's easy, and the look that you get after the building is renovated is quite amazing. People actually desire that kind of look. And we're saving our downtown, you know, the history of our downtown. So when that building came up for sale, I contacted this developer. The price was a little bit high at the time, and I think the building sat empty for around 4 years. And then the commissioners actually decided to cut the price in about half, and I contacted the developer again immediately, and I said, man, that is a good deal. I mean, the cost per square foot on that is down around just over $10 a square foot. To buy a building that's perfectly sound like that, you know, the amount of money that you'll put back into it, say even if you're $100 a square foot or $120, new construction these days to build something new like that would be $200 a square foot. So you can see right away by doing the math that, you know, the investment just is not apples to apples when you're talking new construction versus renovation. And in new construction, I've mentioned it, you know, a couple times already, you just can't build that kind of character in to our buildings anymore. And we'd been talking about loft style units in Casper. I'd been talking to this same group about loft style living, and we looked at one other building in town that still could potentially be a loft building down the road, and that's at the corner of Kimball and C Streets. So what we did with the County Annex / Hotel Virginia, we've got 15 living units going in there, and they'll be the loft style living. So they'll have, you know, some areas of the buildings will have distressed plaster walls or even exposed brick walls like the one that you see behind me. So we're keeping a lot of that character. Even some of the old timber columns will be exposed in all of the living units. We have at least one layer, probably 2 layers of paint on the brick on the outside of that building that we'll be stripping down just like we did with this building. Ironically, that building and this building were both built originally in 1917. So there's lots of similarities. That building and this one both have the soft unfired brick and the mortar that's not holding up very well. They both have these beautiful timber columns, and so there's a lot of stuff that we put into this building renovation that I'm able to translate directly over to that one and know exactly how to approach. Like, for instance, getting the paint removed from the exterior. We already had a method down pat from this building. What we're standing in right now was the old bar. This was a saloon, and this was kind of the red light district of town, for those of you who know the history. And so the stair that you see off to the side was actually, you rented your room in the bar and you went up the stair, and the upper 2 levels were the rooms of the hotel. So,
by the hour, right?
yeah, we're pretty sure that this was probably that type of business because it is in the sandbar area, which is known historically for that. I'd like to do, or what I've always said, is I wanted to set the example with this project to show people, literally. I'm tired of talking about it with people because sometimes they just don't listen, but to literally show people, because the people in Casper know what this building used to look like, and it was literally an eyesore, and they know what it looks like now after the renovation that we've done, and it's beautiful. I mean, I don't think there's a person in town that would say we need to knock that building down now, but 3 years ago there was probably a whole bunch of them. And I want to set the example with this building, and I want to set the example with the Hotel Virginia County Annex project as well, to show people literally that you don't need to tear these buildings down. They can be really beautiful buildings, and they can be reused again for other purposes. So our plans with this one is to, we've already gotten great publicity locally. We're starting to show it to other people across the state even, and show them that, even in these little towns, these buildings of this type don't have to be tore down. You can renovate them and find other uses for them. And if you have an architect or a contractor that can't see that vision, find yourself an architect that can see the vision. And then the last thing that we are going to try to do with this project is submit it for some design awards. It's pretty uncommon that a renovation project or a historic project would be considered for a design award, but we think we've done such a good job with this one, and there's a lot of unique features about the existing building and the new items, the way that we've used it, that we feel this one probably could be a contender for a design award on some level, whether it be a state or regional award. So we're going to submit it and see where that goes for us. So we'd like to see more buildings saved and less covering of the buildings over with EFS, like you see across the street here, being true to what the building was, even if the brick is in not great shape, is still, in my opinion, better than covering it over with paint or EFS or some other product that's not of the era. So we hope we've set the example, and we hope we drum up some more work in Casper and the region, and save some old buildings and do some cool projects, really.